Hello and welcome to Kitchen Table Talks. My name is Toni Austin-Allen and I am here with Dr. Roy Austin, author of Definitions for Living, a book dedicated to helping you live more effectively and happily, both personally and in your relationships with others. A number of years ago, Dr. Austin compiled numerous articles which he had written to assist his clients into what is now his book, Definitions for Living, making sense of words and ideas that define our lives. Recently, he and I began sitting at our kitchen table and talking about his book, and we became excited about the possibility of sharing our conversations with others who might benefit from them. The podcast you are about to listen to are the product of the recordings we began making of our conversations. We have discussed the book chapter by chapter and have produced this series of podcasts to accompany the printed version of the book, which is now available as an ebook on various publishing websites. Although we believe you will benefit greatly from the podcasts themselves, you will get the most out of them by purchasing the book, reading each chapter prior to listening to the podcast, and having it available to follow along with our conversations. The ebook is available on Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble, Scribe, Booktopia, Apple Books, Layman's, and Adlibris. We hope you enjoy our talks at our kitchen table as much as we have, and that your life will be greatly enriched by having shared our conversations with us. Welcome to the podcast, Definitions for Living, Kitchen Table Talks. Now that's an interesting title for a podcast. And my name is Toni Austin-Allen, and I'm here with a very special person, my dad. And his name is Dr. Roy Austin, and he is the author of Definitions for Living. And you came out with a hard copy of this book a while back, didn't you?
Yes, several years ago. And it was the product of actually many years of writing, off and on in various forms and fashions. It was not a quickly written book. So it began back at the end of the 20th century and is still going today.
Now you are a family therapist, a psychotherapist. You've done couples counseling. You've done counseling for individuals. You've just done everything. And so you've probably seen a whole lot that was included in this book.
Yes, my specialty was dealing with what I call just folks.
I like that.
Just ordinary folks trying to live their life the best they knew how to do. I did not specialize in such as alcohol or drug treatment or severe mental disorders. So I dealt with the general public who just good people who were struggling with various aspects of their life and just needed some help doing it better.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have brought this book with the help of a friend who made this help make this book digitally available, and we'll give you more information about that at the end of the podcast. But with this this new introduction of the book digitally, you and I, we just thought, what do we want to do with this? Because, you know, you had, back in my early 30s, I was a young mother. I didn't know much about relationships at all, but I was doing my best. And you asked me to do artwork for this, and that's still in the book, both the hard copy and digitally. But I have to confess, I never really dove into this book. And for whatever reason, I have no idea. I think it just wasn't time. But it was time in the last couple of years, and started diving into it. And you and I started talking. How could we get this out to the public? Because this is incredible information that we don't find out there.
Yeah, I was just remembering, Toni, how all this got started. We were just sitting out here in western New Mexico now that I'm retired, and we're living under the same roof and enjoying life together in my retirement. And we were just sitting around the fire in your home and talking about this. And then I think you mentioned something about, we need to make this available to other people. This is stuff that a lot of people don't know anything about. And it did finally come to a point where we decided to sit around the kitchen table where we are right now.
Right now, we're sitting at the kitchen table.
And just started talking about it and having a conversation. So we decided to call it Kitchen Table Talks, which I love.
And what I love about what we've done in these podcasts that you will be hearing from week to week is that you're not reading. You didn't create an audio book out of this. It wasn't really the kind of book that you could do that. It wasn't necessary because the chapters are short. But you have fleshed out each chapter to talks that are between 45 minutes and an hour long from sometimes 3 pages of material because the material is so rich and so applicable to every person on this planet.
Well, thank you for saying that. I appreciate it.
Could you talk to us a little bit more about why you wrote the book and where the information comes from and, what the format of the book is? Just tell us what you can about the book so we know what we're getting into.
I was a therapist and a teacher of psychology, beginning as a teacher at the college level for a number of years, and then went into private practice. And so my career has spanned over 50 years of both teaching and doing psychotherapy. And over the years, part of my therapy was to produce documents, articles that helped explain to my clients the concepts and the ideas that we were talking about there. And I remember I first started with a chart that I had on a board in my office, and I would just get a magic marker and use newsprint and come up with concepts and ideas and wiggles and triangles and lines and words. And I saved them, by the way, over the years, had files full of these newsprint sketches and ideas, and then started to consolidate them into actual articles. Some of them would be just 2 or 3 pages. Some of them became lengthy over time. And then I started transcribing my ideas from the newsprint into these articles. And then my clients started collecting them over time. And they had files of their own that they would bring to the therapy. And then over time, more and more of my clients started asking me to consolidate all of these. They got tired of having to file them in the file and then look for them and bring them to the sessions. And so they said, would you please put this in some form of a permanent book-like production, because not only it would be helpful to me to have a single place for all of this stuff instead of dozens of separate articles, but also I want to share it with my family and my friends. Mm-hmm. And so eventually I started writing it in the form of, with the concept of it eventually becoming the book that it did become. And so it finally, this was the product of a number of years' work, client after client after client, topic after topic after topic, that just became what we have today.
Now you talk about it being a book of working definitions, kind of like a dictionary. In fact, it's in alphabetical order.
Yes, I had a purpose for that, which I'll explain in just a moment as far as alphabetizing the chapters. But in helping my clients understand how to do life more effectively, I noticed over time that several themes began repeating themselves, several concepts, ideas, words that I kept hearing over and over again, and I would start looking them up in the dictionaries and online and getting ideas, and then began to understand that there was a limitation to what the dictionary was able to do just out of necessity. It could not be lengthy definitions, and so I started expanding on them, and with my training and experience, I started fleshing them out, as you said earlier, into what I call working definitions that were helpful in everyday living, to help people live more effectively using the concepts and the ideas that are addressed in the book.
I'm going to break in here just a minute. You'll notice in these podcasts, you're going to hear noises because we really are in the kitchen, and we live out very rurally, and we get weather, we get wind, and right now we're getting rain. And so as you listen, it really is quite a little intimate journey with us. Yeah. Because we are in the high desert, and right now it just started to rain for a little bit. So throughout the podcast, don't be alarmed if you start hearing unusual sounds. We just decided to keep it in because this is the way it sounds here.
Yeah, this is sort of a fun part of the recording.
So talk about the alphabetical order, because I found it fascinating as we've talked and studied that although it was alphabetized, it is not random in any form or in any form or way. They intertwine and build on each other. It's unfathomable how this book works.
Well, that was a nice surprise that I had when we started these conversations, because I had no idea when I alphabetized the chapters that it would eventually come out that they did build on each other very nicely, one after another, and so that was a neat extra gift. But I put the chapters in alphabetical form for a very specific purpose, and that is to make them easily accessible to the reader, so that it became more of a resource book, so that if something came up like, okay, I don't understand the whole concept of trust, for instance, well, you could just turn to the chapter on trust, and you knew exactly where it was because it was in alphabetical listing. And so you don't have to read the book from cover to cover like you would a novel. You can pick and choose any time you want to for any given topic. But the nice thing I began finding out was that over time, just like my clients discovered, is that when we would talk about one topic, it would connect to another topic in another part of the book or another article that I had already written for them. And so they and I started making connections to the chapters. And so they built on each other and expanded on each other. And so you might start toward the middle of the book and read a chapter, and it might trigger something that leads you to read a chapter in the first part of the book or in the last part of the book. And so many of them are connected and, as you said, intertwined, so that it leads the reader all the way through the book, but not necessarily just chapter by chapter by chapter.
I want to talk about, you have talked about these as definitions, and I am going to make an assumption that some of our readers or some of our listeners will read or hear some of your definitions and explanations and interpretations and say, well, he's just wrong. And what I'm really encouraging the listeners and the readers to do is suspend our beliefs, because we learn so much about words, our own English language. We learn so much about relationships that don't really work, and sometimes have been told to us or taught to us that a word means this, but we're really using it incorrectly. And you've done a great deal of research and have huge experience on these words and have a lot to offer. So when maybe a definition on, let's say, trust comes, you might define it and explain it a little differently than our readers and listeners might be used to. And would you like to expand on that a little bit?
Yes, I'd be glad to. And you're exactly right. And the reader will have to, here again, sort of suspend judgment a little bit, because it will be strange reading for a lot of them to begin with. But that's why I described in my introduction that these are working definitions. Now, I choose that phrase very specifically because that means, from my experience with my clients and myself in my own life, when I practice them well, and sometimes I don't, that these are definitions or expansions on or explanations of words and concepts that work. So that's why I've called them working definitions. I chose that word deliberately. These are ideas and concepts and steps and skills that actually work. Now, what do I mean by work? It means it helps people live more healthy, effective, loving, caring, productive lives. So the word working means it helps life work better.
And there's a phrase that people like to say sometimes when somebody acts like they've got it all figured out, and the other person will say, well, how's that working for you?
Exactly. And that's the idea, is that so many people's lives are not working well for them, and they don't know that it is so, a reason is so closely connected to not knowing the meanings and the implications of these concepts and how to use them effectively.
Now, do you need the book to help these podcasts to be more effective?
Yes. And I'm glad you used the word more effective. We're both hoping that the podcasts will be effective in and of themselves just by listening to them, but they will be much more effective if our listeners purchase the book. It doesn't cost much online, and read the chapter first that they're interested in, and that's being presented that particular week, and then follow along in the book with the podcast, and it will bring to life and enhance the whole experience if the reader and the listener has the book as well as the podcast to listen to explain it. Because, like you said, it is not an exact verbal representation of the chapters. I didn't want to do it that way. But it will help to know what the chapter says in its entirety so that the podcast comes to life.
I see. And once all the podcasts are out, just like you say in the book, use it as a reference book. And so the listeners and the readers can then come back to what am I working on? Am I working on trust, or boy, I've got to deal with some selfishness I'm feeling, or I'm having selfish feelings, I got to work on this. You can then go to particular chapters. And I know that even though we have discussed the chapters, we've talked about the book, we've read the book, I need to go and listen to them all over again. And because it is a study book, you're not going to get all of this stuff right away.
Oh, that's absolutely true, Toni. One of the basic principles of learning is repetition, as we all know. And my clients have over the years told me many, many times Roy, the first time I read this chapter over or read this article, it didn't make sense to me. Maybe I wasn't ready for it, or I got some of it. I didn't understand the rest of it, or I hadn't practiced it yet. But I came back to it 2 years later or 5 years later, read it over again, and all sorts of lights came on in my head about it. And so I encourage the reader to read and listen to this over and over again as needed, because the more you expose yourself to it, the better it's going to work for you in your everyday life.
And sometimes we're not ready for a certain subject. It might be too difficult, or we're not emotionally ready to deal with it, or we may be working in layers of discovering ourselves where, like you say, come back to it a year from now and it'll have a whole different meaning.
Yeah, one of my favorite stories I've shared with you illustrates what you just said, Toni, is that one night my wife and I were lying in bed sleeping, and about midnight the phone rang, and my wife answered it, and she handed it to me, and she said, "It's for you, Roy." And so I answered. I said, "Hello," and the voice on the other end of the line said, "Hey, Roy." And I knew exactly who it was by the sound of his voice. He had a very unique voice. And I said, "Bill, is that you?" He said, "Yeah, this is Bill." I said, "Bill, I hadn't seen you in 5 years. What's going on?" He said, "Well, I live up in Lubbock now and got a great job up here. And I needed to call you." And I said, "Bill, it's midnight." He said, I know, and I apologize. I'm so sorry, but I couldn't wait another minute. I just had to call you." And I said, What's the call about, Bill?" He said, "Roy, all that stuff you worked with me on 5 years ago back in Dallas?" I said, "Well, yeah, Bill, I remember that really well." He said, "Well, I just need to tell you, it works." And I
love that.
And I said, "Bill, I know it works." He said, "Yeah, I know you knew it, but I just had to tell you bye." And he just hung up. And I've had those kinds of experiences over and over again, of people coming back years later and saying, "That stuff you taught me, that stuff really works." So that's why I call it working definitions.
Well, I'm looking so forward to each week listening to them, and knowing that our readers are listening to them and reading them. And I know it works too. I mean, I have learned so much from you about just relating better, both to myself and to others, just from the work we've already done in this book.
I look forward to it as well.
Well, here we go. Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. Again, Dr. Austin's ebook is available on Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble, Scribe, Booktopia, Apple Books, Layman's, and Adlibris. We look forward to having you join us for our next podcast.